Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Healthy Gut podcast. And today we're going to be talking all about what you can do to lose that undesired weight gain that you might have experienced after developing a condition like SIBO or IBS-C. And to talk to us about this is the wonderful Sandra Tenge. So thank you so much for coming back onto the Healthy Gut podcast and sharing your wisdom on how you help your patients clear that undesired weight gain that they can experience.
Yeah, it's lovely to be back. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Now, I can speak from personal experience on this. I am somebody that will totally survive a famine. My body gains weight happily and it sheds it very difficultly. And one of the first signs or symptoms that I have to alert me to when my gut isn't doing so well is that I start to gain weight, and I gain it really rapidly. And I know when I first discovered I had SIBO and then went through the SIBO treatment protocol, for the first time I was able to shed some of that really kind of frustrating weight gain that I have experienced, particularly around my middle. And whilst the scales didn't change dramatically, I lost 5 kilos or 10 pounds during my SIBO treatment, which is, a good amount to lose when you've been carrying excess, but not, transformative. It wasn't like I lost 30 kilos, but I lost so many centimeters around my tummy. It was quite shocking, actually, what happened to my tummy. And that was the first time that I thought, is it my gut that is making a huge contribution to this undesired weight gain? So, Sandra, talk to us about what can happen. Let's say somebody has developed SIBO and the scales have just gone up and up and up, and their waistline is going out and out and out. They feel like they're eating like a rabbit. They're living off next to nothing because food is bothering them, yet they're gaining. Why is that happening to us?
It's very frustrating, and it almost doesn't make sense when we think about the condition of SIBO or IBS and having a difficulty with absorbing nutrients across the lining of the gut. We automatically think we really should be losing weight. And some people do, but there is this significant trend that we see. And I noticed it as well initially when I was treating my patients and my clients for their gut health issues, and inadvertently over the course of the treatment, they were also saying, wow, my weight has been so stubborn for so long and now it starts, dropping off me, even though they weren't concentrating on diet and exercise from a weight point of view. So it came as a positive side effect to those people that had held on to their weight stubbornly. So what we're considering with this type of weight gain is not necessarily just the normal diet and exercise, calories in, calories out. We need to look outside of that box. So there's a whole range of different factors that trigger us to message the body to hold on to fat stores. And these messages are speaking louder than just that regular, are we eating the same foods as we did once before? And are we exercising the same amount as we did once before? So we call it an unresponsive weight loss. So you can change what you're eating, you can change the amount of energy that you're putting out with your exercise and your activity, and the weight doesn't respond. So very frustrating type of weight loss. So we can go through a couple of the main triggers, so we've got an understanding of what these things are, and perhaps touch as well in the interview, if you like, on some of the things that we can do about them or how we can identify which ones play a role for different people. Obviously, they're not all going to be applicable to everybody, but we can obviously start at the top and talk about some of the ones that may or may not be affecting you as well.
Definitely. Solutions are always what we're after.
Yes, yeah. So firstly, perhaps if we talk about IBS or SIBO with constipation, so methane dominant SIBO or IBS-C. So if we are constipated, where we often have a slow transit time. Sometimes we also have a slow transit time when we don't even realize that we're constipated. So whether it's a slow transit time or constipation that we're feeling, the food is actually sitting around in the gut for longer than it should. So obviously, if we're not using our bowels very regularly and we're not getting a complete emptying, we know, and most people identify that as constipation. But there is a group of patients that feel like they're going really regularly. Maybe they've normalized the fact that they've never had complete emptying, and so they still do have a slow transit time, but they're not really identifying that they're necessarily constipated. So I like my patients to do a bit of an experiment whereby we'll measure their transit time and see if it is, 12 hours, 24 hours in a healthy range, or if it's actually that food is taking a long period of time to come through the gut. So what we do is we have something that is quite undigestible, so some beetroot or some corn or a tablespoon of sesame seeds, for example, and we measure the time it takes to see those come out the other end when we go to the bathroom. And if that's a longer period, so longer than 24 hours, and for some people I've heard them report back to me that it's actually, many days later, we know that the food's sitting around in the gut for longer than it should. And that process causes some fermentation and some microbial imbalances, but also the food's just hanging around for longer than it needs to, and we, that in itself can cause the weight gain. So that's the first thing to manage, to identify, are you constipated? And if so, use some strategies. And I like to use, for my patients with IBS and SIBO, prokinetic herbs, so things like ginger, dandelion root, just to stimulate the liver function. Obviously I'll use laxatives if they're needed for short periods of time until we treat the SIBO and get that methane level down. But using, strategies for methane if it's high, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, for example, is one of the fibers that we do often tolerate well with SIBO. We can't necessarily just add in a lot of fiber, as I'm sure your listeners understand. That's not a strategy that we can incorporate for SIBO. Sometimes I'm using things like magnesium or vitamin C as well. So certainly first treatment and investigative kind of work is done with making sure that we're managing that constipation.
One thing that I had, and I'm pretty sure it was on the Healthy Gut podcast some episodes back, was a conversation with another practitioner who measured the first time you start to see that item, let's say sesame seeds, but also when it stops. Because she was saying on our interview that she's really interested in the complete transit time. Sometimes it can, some little bits can sneak out reasonably quickly, but then the bulk of it can come out quite a bit later. And that was a marker that she looked for. And I know my listeners will be thinking, well, what is a normal transit time? If I do the sesame seed challenge where I take a tablespoon of sesame seeds, how long should it take? Is it 6 hours? Is it 36 hours? Like, what's the goal? What's the gold standard of transit time?
I look for that 12 to 24 hour period.
And for many of us, myself included, when I did this challenge, I did sesame seeds. It was quite eye-opening. I was like, yep. It's taking a little longer than 24 hours. And it really reinforced what I already knew, which was that I had a slow transit. I could feel it. I knew it. I knew things kind of sat within my body and didn't come out. And when I started using prokinetics to help stimulate that migrating motor complex in my small intestine, my gosh, it just made me feel better. Even though technically you're not supposed to feel a prokinetic, I felt a sense of lightness and a sense of freedom in my body that I'd never felt before, because it was quite a vast change from how I'd been for all those years. So yes, it didn't necessarily equal going to the toilet, but it made me feel better, which was great.
Yeah, and also it's a treatment then as well, isn't it, for your small intestinal bacterial overgrowth? It's helping clear out that bacteria. So it really crosses over with our treatment. It's not just a weight management strategy. It's definitely a gut management strategy.
Yeah, for sure. Sandra, I'm interested from your experience, and I'll share what I see with my coaching clients that I work with one on one, is that there seems to be, well, there's definitely a correlation between the people that have a methane dominance or IMO, and those people are also often struggling with undesired weight gain, generally around their middle section. I work predominantly with women, often with women who are in perimenopause or postmenopause, or they're in full blown menopause, so also dealing with a lot of hormonal issues. But the weight gain seems to be really problematic for them. And I see it more commonly associated when there's methane gas than the people that have hydrogen dominance. And those people, as a generalization, often struggle to gain weight. I have, two camps of clients, those that are desperately trying to regain some lost weight, and then those that are like me and saying, I just would love to lose some of this weight. It's driving me crazy. It's like I can't do anything to shift it. What do you see with your patient load?
Yeah, I see the same. I see either the constipated or the inconsistent IBS group where they're fluctuating between loose bowels and constipation. And I really put it down to the changes that I then find if I'm doing microbiome mapping testing. So I think the biggest factor with the group that are holding on to this fermented matter in their gut and having a low or slow transit time, they're really fermenting that food into their gut, and then the large bowel microbiome is also imbalanced. So I think it also identifies the need to look outside of the small intestine when we're treating small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and to consider what's happening in the rest of the microbiome. So I'll often find that if someone has been constipated for even, short periods of time, but certainly if they've been constipated for a longer period of time, that their microbiome imbalance will be really disrupted in the large bowel. And so that microbiome mapping really gives us a tailored approach or a guide or a map to tell us how we should change that balance in the microbiome as well. And I think that we know a lot more than we ever have before about the type of species of organisms that favour weight gain and those that favour weight loss. So I think the large bowel microbiome, by addressing that with a guided practitioner who understands the microbiome and what those microbiome stool tests are coming back with, if we challenge and change the microbiome balances, we'll often see flow-on effects, not just with weight, but through to hormones, insulin levels. So that can be, a matter of changing the diet. It can be a matter of bringing in prebiotic fibers as they're tolerated. It can be using certain species of probiotics. And so these are known to change the metabolic rate or the insulin or the hormones that are there in the gut. So there's quite a few hormones that are playing a role. And I think that, you're bringing up as well there, your clients are coming with some of the hormonal issues that we know that relate around the menstrual hormones. So maybe there might be some menopause, there might be some polycystic ovarian syndrome, there might be some PMS, symptoms. So there can be our menstrual hormone fluctuations that definitely can play a role. But there can also be the hormones insulin, leptin, and ghrelin, and they are really related to our metabolism as well as our thyroid hormones. So whatever hormone situation we have, if it's involving any of those hormones, we can have an influence on our satiety or how full that we feel. We can have an influence on our hunger and how many cravings we have, or how hungry we are and how satisfied we feel. And then we can have a flow-on effect to our insulin levels. So our insulin is the hormone produced by the pancreas that carries our sugar and influences our blood sugar level. And if we've been running with high insulin levels for periods of time, we become insulin resistant. And this insulin resistance really relates to that belly fat or storing fat around our middle. So it's a typical place to look and measure our insulin and have a look at the hormonal aspect and how that might be flowing into the picture as well if we're holding weight around the middle.
Let's talk about the picture, which is pretty common in the SIBO community, of somebody that is really stressed because, hey, they're feeling pretty miserable, but also they've got a lot of other life stresses going on. They might have a really busy job. There might be family situations that are causing stress. There might be issues going on in their world that is hard for them to then reduce their stress. So that's then putting their body into that stress response. We know just having SIBO in and of itself can put the body into that stressed response. Therefore, we're living in this kind of elevated stress, elevated hormonal response. What do they do? They might be listening to this thinking, okay, well, yeah, that's me, but then what? What do I do about it?
Yeah, it's at the end of the day, when we're in that flight and fright or stress response, we're producing cortisol, and cortisol is the stress hormone that really is playing into the changes that we see in the body with the weight. So cortisol in itself influences the insulin, the leptin, the ghrelin. Even just having high cortisol levels can have the influence of holding on to that belly fat as well. So if we say, okay, we know that stress and busyness and multitasking, and I think it's good to identify, particularly in this day and age, that stress doesn't necessarily mean like a traumatic stress. Stress can just be how busy we are and how we're running our lifestyle. So many of us are multitasking. We might be working and running a family, and we might be managing our health and managing our finances. We really need to prioritize for this period of healing and this journey of working with our gut health. We really need to prioritize self-care. And I always like working with my clients with a strategy which I call daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly. So I have a discussion with them, and I have a handout with lots of suggestions, but we're really making a commitment to bring something into our self-care routine every day, every week, every month, and every year, so that it's not just like I need to manage my stress, I need to start meditating, or I need to be more mindful, but the week goes by and it never actually, gets cemented in there. So I think that strategy is really great, because if we've got a selection of things that we've chosen, and we might say, okay, for our daily strategies, it might be that I'm setting a chime on my phone that reminds me, on the hour, every hour, to sit and do a mindfulness exercise. It might be whenever I sit down to eat, I'm going to do some belly breathing and bring myself into the parasympathetic nervous system to help my gut digest that food. You and I have spoken about that one many times. With all different aspects of gut health, that's really useful. But it also might be, bringing the clock forward half an hour and going to bed earlier and switching off devices and laying in bed in a dark room. And, it might be the practice of taking up reading, or, swapping something that you do. Might be swapping out, caffeine and switching that to herbal tea to bring down your cortisol reaction. Might be putting your legs up the wall in a yoga pose before you go to bed of a night. So it doesn't need to be something that takes up a lot of your time, but it's something that you can really make a commitment with for yourself. And I find that if that is, particularly if it's something that you're doing throughout the day, by the end of the day, you don't have the high cortisol level. If you're switching into the parasympathetic arm of the nervous system regularly, you won't end up with the cortisol as high at the end of the day. When we measure cortisol levels with things like the Dutch hormone test, for example, or cortisol testing on its own, we often see that people are carrying their cortisol all through the night, and they're waking up with high cortisol levels in the morning. So it's really a challenge then to start the day when you're already stressed from the day before. And it's really hard to turn off your cortisol levels at night time. And it's much better practice to try and prevent them from rising through the day. So those daily strategies. And then a weekly strategy. It might be taking a yoga class or going for a long walk. It might be every weekend that you go to the farmer's market or you spend time in nature. And then, the larger, bigger, rewarding kind of self-care strategies at least once a month, where you might go away or spend time catching up with girlfriends and having a real laugh and a big, fun lunch together, or, going away with your partner, or something that is more of a reward. But if you only have those monthly or weekly things in, you're really trying to crisis manage. So I think that the gut health aspects, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, self-care routines, gut-directed hypnotherapy, I'm working with a lot with my client base as well. All of these things, they flow onto many of the causes of the weight gain. So they cross over into the insulin, they cross over into the leptin and ghrelin imbalances, into the hormonal balances. They can be you can tick off all of these kind of factors, by working with the nervous system. I have a handout that I use not just with the SIBO patients, but just with anyone I'm working with weight, which is the healthy weight checklist. And it goes through a similar list of factors that keep us holding on to weight. And you're welcome to share that with the group afterwards as well. I think the working with the nervous system first and the stress response first and self-care is really the top priority, because it just flows through so beautifully with so many of those other factors.
Well, I'll put a link to that download in the show notes. So if you'd like to check that out, please click the link and you can get that download for free. I thought I'd share a little bit of an update on my own health journey, because I regularly share how I've been going. I'm a science experiment of one in the body of Rebecca Coomes, and I really like to share what I do because often it helps other people. In 2019, I did an interview with the amazing Dr. Jason Horolek, who is just a microbiome walking encyclopedia. And I had done a DNA trigger test on my microbiome, and we were going through the results of that. And if you want to have a look at that interview, please check it out. I'll pop that in the show notes so you can get access to that. What was discovered at the time was that I had quite a lot of work to do. I was definitely pretty imbalanced. My microbiome diversity was reasonably low. I had quite a bit to do to rebuild things. And then I also had some imbalances where some of the bacteria types that you want more of, I was quite low in. And then the ones that you don't want so much of, I had quite a lot of. So we had a real Dr. Jason Horolek and I, who was consulting with me personally, as well as doing the podcast. His approach to me was food first. So really take a nutritional approach. Your microbiome knows what to do with food. Let's support with pre and probiotics, and a real lifestyle approach. As someone that has always carried weight, I've never, other than for about a month when I was 23 after dieting heavily for 2 years, have I ever sat at a weight that I was happy with. So I've always felt that I'm bigger than I would like to be. And around that time, I made the decision that the reason why my body carried excess weight was because it was a byproduct of all the other things going on. So to stop worrying about the scales and to think about my gut health instead. Fast forward to just recently, and I did a new microbiome test with the lovely Alyssa Tate, and I had her on the podcast some time ago now. We did a podcast on visceral manipulation, and she is a naturopath, a nutritionist, a physiotherapist, someone that has been an eternal student and is now really delving into the microbiome. So we did a 3-tier microbiome analysis, which she gave me the results just yesterday, actually. And what was amazing is fast forward from 2019 to today, my microbiome diversity has completely changed. It has just flourished, which was so exciting to see. the balancing of, the good critters versus the not so good critters is way more in line where it should be. And Alyssa said to me, it's weird because I wasn't expecting it, but it's kind of there's nothing to see here call. And I said, that's the best call I've ever had when it comes to my gut health, because I've never had nothing really to do. It's now just about little changes. So let's make sure that I'm getting enough resistant starch in my diet, and let's look at some prebiotics that we know are supportive for certain bacteria groups, that we can now just try and give them a bit of extra support. So why I'm sharing that is I took an approach of, don't worry about dieting, Rebecca. The weight loss will come eventually. Get your gut in a really good state. Heal it. Get it working well. Empty your bowels every day. Reduce your stress. Focus on whole body rather than a number on the scales. In really recent times, my husband and Ruby and our little dog Basil and I have escaped the brutal Melbourne winter, and we've come to Queensland. And so I had a part-time job, which I'm not doing, which was causing a lot of stress. I am walking every day, so I'm getting sunlight. I'm getting a lot of fresh air. I'm really just living in the moment, which is a beautiful thing to be able to do. My stress levels have dramatically reduced, and I'll just to ask you some questions about stress levels and cravings next, because this is what I struggle with. And I have not counted a calorie. I have not measured or weighed food. And yet my clothes are getting looser and looser and looser and looser. I look better than I did when we left Melbourne. And I'm putting it down to the fact that I can just be. My gut is in a better state. I'm eating a lot of lovely fresh food. I'm not stressed. I'm sleeping. I'm going for walks almost every day. Today it's pouring with rain, so I'm not out walking, but every other day I'm getting sunlight, fresh air, and having fun. I'm having time to play with my little girl and my little crazy Jack Russell dog. And there's so much more happiness in my life than there was. I'm also not getting the cravings. So, Sandra, this is my next question, cravings, particularly for me and for many others when it comes to stress, or when we've been on restricted diets like a SIBO diet. We can get these immense cravings. I, for one, get chocolate cravings. I just turn into a crazed beast. I will tear a house down looking for chocolate or something sweet. What do our cravings tell us about ourselves, and can they be linked to deficiencies?
Yeah, they can. And I've had this similar experience. There's been times in my life where I can have leftover Easter eggs sitting in the cupboard for months and months and months, and I wouldn't even go near them. And then at other times, usually for myself, when my microbiome's been out of balance and I've had a more of a yeast overgrowth, the cravings will just, as you say, you can finish a meal and the first thing is often, now I want something sweet. It's a really strange, feeling to have when it's that strong, that that you're full, you're not hungry. It's not because it's 3 o'clock and your blood sugar levels are dipping. You can eat something, but then immediately you can be unsatisfied with that until you've had something sweet. So there's lots of things that can be playing a role. So I think, if there's an awareness that you do have cravings, it's the first thing is to check and think, are my blood sugar levels swinging? Have I actually fed myself well? Or am I craving because my body's saying I do need energy? That's the kind of craving that you want to listen to, and you want to then change the dynamics of, what's feeding you your energy over the day, and make sure you're getting lots of satiating fats and proteins and the kind of carbs that you're up to, and the fiber that you're up to on your SIBO kind of diet plan. So I think you've got to have those macros kind of correct in place. But if we're talking about the kind of cravings where I'm not actually hungry, I'm just craving on top of, what I've been giving my body for energy. So they're really messages that one of those hormones is speaking quite loudly, or that the microbiome is imbalanced. So with the microbiome imbalance, it is often a parasite or a yeast overgrowth that I tend to find in the microbiome mapping that I do that will kind of follow along with cravings, and often they will really reduce when we've changed that microbiome imbalance. So that's a really important one to kind of look into. And then I think they also fluctuate a lot with the hormones of leptin and ghrelin and insulin and cortisol. So the leptin is the hormone that gives us that feeling of satiety or fullness, and ghrelin is the hormone also acting through the hypothalamus that gives us our hunger signals. So if they're out of whack, we can keep getting these feedback kind of mechanisms where we're getting these signals that we are hungry and that we need to eat. And particularly if we're craving something like chocolate, often I'll find that people have some deficiencies in some of those nutrients like magnesium or chromium or zinc that are needed to keep our blood sugar level kind of normalized. Now, that may be just something that fluctuates when you're stressed, and it may be something that fluctuates like with a premenstrual kind of pattern. It doesn't need to be there all the time, but it is a threshold that kind of gets tipped over at certain times. And cortisol levels and stress will definitely influence those. And if you've got a vulnerability there, that will definitely tip you over. So it's really interesting, I think, for you, Rebecca, in the story you've told that, you know, I know you eat so well. I don't imagine you were nutrient deficient before you went there. I know you're eating a lot of fresh food there, but, you know, you wouldn't have been specifically nutrient deficient before. And your microbiome has been great. So you haven't got those overgrowths as evidence, you know, when you've just repeated your results. So then what that leaves, isn't it, is that your stress levels were playing such a big role. And it's really lovely to hear that you're having fun and, you know, spending a lot more time laughing and a lot less time being so busy. And I think that sounds like for you what has changed that hormonal balance, which is fantastic. And if we're not in the position to be able to, you know, step down from jobs that are bothering us or take that holiday or balance our life, if we feel like we are at the moment stuck, you know, and we might be making a plan to get our stress triggers down, but at the moment we feel we're a bit trapped and we can't do that, then just using exercise and sleep is a really good strategy. So even if you feel like I can't manage my stress levels, I'm stuck in the position, I'm going to be stressed for a while, you know, you might have a light at the end of the tunnel, but it might not be for 2 or 3 months' time, then really working with quality sleep, particularly with magnesium, because magnesium feeds into the blood sugar balance, but it's also the calmer of the mind and the body, so it feeds into the nervous system aspect, helping our GABA pathways, and it also helps with our sleep quality. So magnesium is a really lovely supplement that we can bring in, and I often find cravings change really very quickly with magnesium. Even if you really need to have magnesium, you know, ongoing to get your tissue levels right. But even if you are having cravings and then you supplement with magnesium, they can actually change that within a few hours. So that's always a nutrient that I'm working with.
And which type of magnesium?
Usually magnesium citrate. Sometimes we're using magnesium as a treatment strategy for our constipation as well. So it can be, you know, a different type or a combination. Sometimes we're using magnesium in combination with herbs that are helpful with cravings as well. There's lots of great herbs that can reduce cravings like Jemima. But we might be working with magnesium alongside B vitamins because we're working on the nervous system aspect. So it doesn't necessarily need to be magnesium on its own, but magnesium citrate is often a good form.
And is there a way that we can test for mineral and vitamin deficiencies?
Yeah, there is. So we can check, some are more effectively tested than others. Magnesium will fluctuate on a day-to-day basis, which is why it has to be dosed very regularly, because the magnesium that you're supplementing with or you're having through your diet on one day won't necessarily build up and be there days later. So some blood tests are not really, they're a snapshot, but they're not a really accurate result of what it would be like every day. It's like when we check our blood sugar level. We might check it on one day when we've been doing a fasting blood test, but it's not to say what's it doing on other days. So there is certain blood tests that try and capture our blood sugar and insulin levels, over a longer period of time. But also our nutrients, like zinc, vitamin D is also very important one to check in on as well. And they are much more of a steady blood, kind of blood test. They're not fluctuating on a day-to-day basis. So they're very helpful. And interestingly as well, your vitamin D, I'm assuming, is taking a great leap up. You've come to the sunny Queensland weather and you're out walking more, and it's really interesting that fresh air and the sunshine could be increasing your vitamin D. And we know that vitamin D in itself influences not just inflammation, but the weight kind of pathway as well. And so there's lots of factors there that are playing a role. And so I think it's useful when you're working with a practitioner, for your listeners, for them to be aware, of what your nutrient deficiencies may be. A lot of the time with SIBO, there may be nutrient deficiencies that have been there for a long period of time because of malabsorption across the lining of the gut. And certainly you can kind of try and make a pathway go in the direction that you want it to go in. But if the foundational nutrients are not there that create that pathway, you're really pushing against something that's not going to work. It's a little bit like making a cake when you don't have the right ingredients. You can be saying, I really want this, nervous system pathway to go in the pathway that I want it to, but if I don't have the right ingredients, it's not going to be able to go there. So sometimes just looking at the foundational foods for medicine that you can use for nutrient deficiencies or supplements, if you feel that your gut assimilation is not reliable enough at the moment and your gut healing journey doesn't allow you to get all of the nutrients out of food, or you're not able to tolerate the certain foods that you need for those nutrients, then supplementation as a temporary kind of form can be really great.
When you're working with someone that does have SIBO or IMO, what's your approach? Is it deal with that first, the undesired weight gain second, or vice versa?
I would usually always deal with the gut first. So similarly to what you've experienced, the weight will definitely follow. In my experience, you can be thrashing, the weight aspect, and people come to me and they've been, diet and exercise and, even supplements or medications for weight loss, but they're just unresponsive, and it can be very, very disheartening and frustrating because they're putting a lot of effort into these measures, to move them towards a healthier weight, but it's just not working. And I see that myself as that there is these messages and what's talking louder. And I think some of these messages that we've spoken about today that are related to our gut health, they can be speaking louder, and so you're really fighting an uphill battle. So I think make that easier by pulling out as many of those factors early on as you can and concentrate on the gut first. Probably I do like to help people with their cravings because I feel like cravings can speak really strongly. It's not necessarily about willpower. And obviously, if we're looking at our gut health, we're making decisions about the food as one of the foundational treatment strategies to working with our gut. So if people have got cravings that are very difficult for them, I will prioritize that because that obviously will help us address the gut health issues.
And there's nothing worse than when a craving hits, and I've lived this many times over in my life, where it's like you are possessed. You can't do anything else but go and find that piece of chocolate. And when I first started treating SIBO, my very, very first go at it, about day 2 or 3, the cravings hit, and I was just, I mean, it was pure grit and determination, because I was very overzealous in taking the SIBO diet for, letter by letter. I just didn't want to deviate, because I am an all or nothing person. I'm either doing it 100% or I'm not. I'm 0%. So I knew if I wanted to follow the diet protocol, I had to be strict with myself. And those cravings, I mean, it was all I could do not to go to the shops and buy a block of chocolate and smother it over my whole body. It's really tough when those cravings hit. So I'm very sympathetic whenever I'm working with someone who's dealing with really intense cravings. But like you said, Sandra, it's often a sign of something else. It's not just being weak-willed. It's often other little critters calling out to us and saying, "Hey, I'm starving. Would you go and get me some simple sugar, please?" I love it.
That's right. That's right. And so and I think understanding that really takes a little bit of the pressure off people too. I think people feel like there might be their own judgment, or there might be the judgment of people in their home that they're living with, or in their relationships. But it can be really nice to understand that message, that it isn't just your willpower, that it's not just you letting yourself down. There is physiological reasons why this is happening. This is not your fault. This can be, you can have support. There's ways we can help you with managing this. All of those messages are really important, and often take a lot of the pressure off, and therefore the stress that people find themselves in when they're dealing with these kind of gut health conditions and deciding what to eat 3 times a day. It's a lot of focus, as we both know.
It is. Alyssa said to me something which has just really stuck with me. It was such a profound, I mean, it was almost a castaway comment at the end of our session, but it has really resonated with me. And she said, "You could have starved yourself over the last 4 years in an effort to try and lose the weight you would like to lose, and you would have gone backwards with your microbiome. Instead, you focused on a food-first approach." And I have eaten the colours of the rainbow. Whenever I go to the fresh food market, I'm looking for a fruit or vegetable that I don't normally eat. What could I bring in that's different? What could be a new plant-based food for my microbiome? I'm really thinking, I've been consciously eating, consciously trying to hit at least 40 different plant foods a week. And I know Dr. Jason Horlick says trying to get to 1,000 over the year, which 1,000? I think that's what he says. No, I have to check my stats, but it was a lot. And that's what I've been doing. And she said, it's all the markers from my labs show that I'm moving in a great direction, which is that nothing showed up that was a marker for poor health. Everything's going in the direction of good health. And she said, wouldn't you rather be healthier and yes, still carrying some extra weight, but be healthier and feeling a lot better than be skinny with a really bad gut and feeling miserable? She said, the weight will come. The weight loss will come. Focus on the health first. And I think that's a really important takeaway for all of my listeners who are in the place that I have been in, still carrying extra weight than what I'd like, is health first. The weight loss will come. And the weight loss will come when the body is in a healthy place. And I think that is a good way for us to, I guess, finish on the final thing, which is on mindset and emotions, because this can be an extremely emotional topic for people. We can feel really negative about ourselves, particularly when you're watching your clothing sizing going up, not going down, and when you don't want it to go up. How do you work with your patients around that mindset and emotional piece that is so connected with undesired weight gain?
It's a whole topic on its own, isn't it? And it's a whole strategy on its own as well. And I think that it's great to have support. It's nice to identify what your mindset is, and if you feel that it's anything less than ideal, or it fluctuates. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Sometimes we can have quite a lot of strength and positive self-talk, and then, something might happen and we're influenced by something and it all takes a big dive. And in that time when it takes a dive, we really kind of fall off our plan. So I think having that consistency, really being kind to yourself and understanding that it's not only a role that you have to play, that there is lots of things that can support you, from some of your self-care strategies, making sure that the stress levels are down and you're sleeping well, and, movement has a huge impact on endorphins, as we know, and all of those things. But also looking outside of yourself and making sure that you're communicating and you're open, and, accountability is really great, and having a sounding board. And that could be your practitioner, but it might be someone that's really trusted and very positive influence, in your life. And then I think, your practitioner, really, have a conversation with them as while you're discussing your diet and you're discussing your supplements and your treatment plan and your microbiome results and all of these things. You have that time within your consultations with your practitioner just to touch base on your mindset, so that it's part of the treatment plan, is a really nice strategy. And then there's lots of wonderful practitioners that I've worked alongside over the years that use a whole range of different psychotherapy techniques or bodywork techniques or psychology or counseling techniques, emotional freedom techniques. There's lots of techniques out there that are available to us to use to really support us, and some of those are things that you would be in an ongoing relationship with another practitioner about. But some of them are things that you can learn, and then you can just, take away into your everyday practice. There might be some, somatic kind of techniques that you've learned, or some tapping techniques that you've learned. So you learn them and then you bring them back and use them yourself at home. So I think that that being mindful that, there's a huge, big area out there of support for you, and you're not trying to do it alone.
Yeah, that's really sound advice. And I always talk about building your dream team. And if one of those people on your dream team is someone that works with the mind, so let's say it's a psychologist, and I have worked with psychologists over the years, and they've been an amazing support to me as part of my return to health, then that is part of your dream team. That's part of the mix that you need. And I think also being honest with yourself, if you do recognize that there is an issue and that you do need that help, that's the time to go and seek it. And it's better to get help than to try and avoid it, and then the problem gets bigger. And I know, we haven't delved into this, and I do have a podcast that I did in the past, which is all around this subject, but disordered eating is very common amongst our SIBO community folk. And I really encourage you that if food is starting to become quite problematic, if you're feeling quite resentful, or if you're using it as a form of punishment, or you're restricting in intention to try and deprive yourself, or whatever it might be that food has become for you, seeking out the support of a qualified psychiatrist or a psychologist that specializes in food can be really beneficial. I did that myself. And it was great. It was really great to go and speak to somebody that was skilled and trained in this area, and really help give me some strategies and some tools that I could then implement moving forward to stop using food as an enemy, or as a tool of deprivation, or as punishment, etc., etc. So, but that's a whole nother subject. So I will put the link to that show in the show notes, because I know that has been really helpful for other people in the past when they've heard that episode. And it was a huge light bulb moment for me when I did the interview, and I came away and went, I think I need to do some work in this area. And off I went and found a psychologist to help me. So, Sandra, thank you so much for coming on to the show once again. It's lovely to have you come back. Obviously, people who have been listening might be thinking, I'd really like to work with Sandra. How can they get in touch with you? And are you taking on new patients at the moment?
Yes, I am. I do see people via telehealth, or also in my practice two practices in Melbourne. So very happy if people would like to book through the website. I think the link there will be in the show notes as well. But also I do 10-minute complimentary calls. So if people would just like to first have a chat with me and talk through whether they think I am a good fit for them, very happy for you to book that complimentary 10-minute call as well.
Lovely. And you do work with people from all around the world, so don't let your location or if you live outside of Australia stop you from booking in with Sandra, because you work with people in all sorts of countries.
Yes, I do, yeah.
Wonderful. Well, Sandra Tenge, thank you so much for coming back onto the Healthy Gut podcast and sharing your wisdom on how if we get a healthy gut, we can get a healthy weight. A topic so close to my heart. So thank you once again for coming onto the show.
Thanks for having me. Goodbye, everyone.